Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, here with more answers to your questions. So as always, on Tuesday, I, took forever to answer questions that probably didn't need to take forever to answer, but it's just so interesting to talk about this stuff, and it's all so complex. And that's all to say, I'm just really thankful that I have so many amazing listeners who want to listen. I've gotten a couple funny / bad, but mostly funny comments on Spotify episodes recently where dudes will go back to like it's always the first like 10 episodes. So I'm like, first and foremost, 8 years ago, happy 8 years of Let's Talk About Myths, baby. But also then they'll just come in with like, I feel like genuinely guilty being a man and listening to you, like not all men. And I just think it's so funny that argument still exists. Like obviously it still exists within conservative men and whatever, but like the type of men who are otherwise happy to consume my content, I just find it so interesting. And because of that, before we dive into the questions, I just want to like, I guess, give a explanation of why this idea of not all men is not helpful and not accurate. Like, and it doesn't mean that like every individual man is an individual problem. Like that's not the point. Not all sharks, right? Not all bears. But all sharks have the potential, and all bears have the potential to do that kind of damage. And when we're talking about a system, and like, okay, let's keep it just in the mythology because that's what I do, right? When we're talking about a culture and a mythology that existed, at such an early point and is credited for like being the foundation, quote unquote, of quote unquote Western civilization, right? Like it is regularly lauded as the foundation for our entire society. And when that foundation is built on stories where men use the bodies of women in order to continue on with the cultural like story, like that's an issue. And it doesn't like mean also that we shouldn't love this mythos because it's incredible and it's wide ranging. And the easiest and simplest thing to do if you're kind of like battling this feeling of like, how do I love this when it is built on so much damage and so much like danger, is that there were other people back then. And their like opinions and their stories might not have been written down, but they existed. And so like, it doesn't mean that the mythology is all bad. Obviously, I fucking love it more than life itself. It just means we have to pick apart these aspects of it and look closer. Like I do all the time, we pick apart this idea of like Zeus, quote unquote, seducing a woman or like carrying someone off, like, or those the people who argue about the like origins of the word rape. And we just look at the fact that like the reason why these things weren't seen as bad back then was because women were property, not people. And because it was about property damage and the stealing and like desecrating, for lack of a better word, of like property. And that is all like factual, and it absolutely falls on the men. And like, no, not every individual ancient man, just like not every individual man today, But every man benefits from a society that privileges men over anyone else. Every man benefits from that. And that's why this idea of not all men doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense because, yeah, like no one's saying that every individual man is going to do something dangerous or something violent. But every man does benefit from this society that privileges maleness, that privileges male bodies and male, like, everything, right? Like, anyway, I didn't plan for that to start this off, but I just keep thinking about these comments I receive because I just think there's this enormous disconnect between a type of man who considers himself like an ally and one of the good ones, but still can't see why not all men is a dangerous argument and why it doesn't actually mean anything. And so I just thought, for you dudes who are listening to me, and I love you for that, but I need you to understand why the argument of not all men doesn't work, doesn't pass a test, and it makes you look like you're not paying attention. Because the whole system is set up for you. The entire system, the medical system, the political system, the democratic system, every system was made for you. And all of history up until a point was recorded in your image and with you as the main character, and the rest of us are side characters. And that's why not all men have the capability to do violence or want to or anything, but all men benefit from that system of violence. And we're 7 minutes in, but the world is on fire and I have things to say. So it's my birthday tomorrow when this episode comes out. And so I reserve the right to start an episode with a lecture. Thanks for listening. Let's talk pronunciation, merch, the Odyssey, Heracles versus 100 gorillas. This is 8 years of Let's Talk About Myths, baby. All right. Okay, so to the actual questions, and I'm so excited. I actually have 3 voicemail questions from listeners. Remember, I set up this voicemail server so you guys can send in your questions that way so that I can play them on the show and answer them more directly, and that's super fun, and I'm really excited about it, but I only have 3. So 3 are going in here, but I would love if you sent me more. So those will be peppered throughout. Otherwise, though, we are starting with the good old text questions. All right, this first one is from Jessie, and we're starting out with something a little silly and fun and also educational. Jessie says, I recently listened to the episode that mentioned how Hades' name was pronounced as Aides, but with a breath before it, and I was wondering about other names that start with an H sound. Are they the same? And absolutely yes. So ancient Greek did not have an H like we have an H. If you're ever like looking at ancient Greek or Greek today, you will visibly see an H in uppercase, but it is not an H sound. It's one of they have a handful of like EI sounds, and Ita is one of those. That's what looks like an H in uppercase. And in ancient Greek, what we understand, and I'm sure there are like some of the most brilliant linguists in the world or philologists, whatever they go by, who have figured this stuff out, because God, I have no idea how we would ever figure this bit out. But we do know that every name that we pronounce with an H today in English did have that like breathing sound. And so what it was is like not a letter. It was this understanding that you would like start a breath and like breathe it out to say that name. when I learned this, I was utterly consumed by it. I think it's so interesting, and it really changes how you see these types of names. And then particularly if you are going to Greece or interacting with modern Greek in any way, or, you know, anything in that realm, or just generally it's nerdy and interesting. So modern Greek lost that breathing sound entirely. Modern Greek does not have an H sound like in English. They have a he sound, which looks like an X, and it's often pronounced ki, because it's more like a KH sound, like in Chiron or Chiron. So it's, you know, it's quite a different sound. Sometimes when North American super English people are trying to learn, so like the word for thank you is a great example of this in modern Greek, because they'll tell people like us with our accents to pronounce it more like an H in here, which is a he, but it's really this more like in your throat. I wish I knew how to describe anything like that. But the Greek word for thanks is efcharistos. Yeah, it's been a while since I've said it. Efcharisto. And in, you know, they'll tell us in English, you can say efcharisto or something like that, and I think that's terrible. But like, it is kind of that general H sound, but it's not the way we think of it. So when we think of like Hades, Hera, Hephaestus, Helios, any of those, that is this breathing sound. So if you're actually looking at the names spelled in ancient Greek, like there is no H. Hades is Ares, and like in modern Greek, it's Ares. I need to get better at the delta. Ares, and then Ira is Hera, Hephaestos, Hephaestus, Hermes. That sounds a little bit more like the bag, but it's not totally wrong. It's Hermes. Like, oh, now it sounds more like the bag. It's probably not quite like that. My brain is like messing with it. But it's all kind of like that with these H's. And so it's really interesting to know this, like for lots of reasons, but especially if you're thinking in modern Greek, like drop that H, it's not there. And I think, yeah, it's just really fun and nerdy. So thank you for that question, and a reason for me to practice some of my Greek pronunciation, because I have been trying to learn. I'm not great at speaking Greek, but I've gotten half decent at some of the pronunciation. All right, next up from Rachel, also straight into the point. Let's talk about merch, baby. Where's your merch at? Thanks for being a light in this dark world. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so for like 6 months, I've been talking about merch and a new website and everything. And honestly, we are probably like a week or two out. I don't totally know logistically like when I can start physically selling and shipping merch, but here's the deal. So at the end of last year, I ordered a bunch of merch, and so it's really like I'm trying to make it both more, sustainable in various ways, but also the most profitable, and, various things that I've been trying to do to try to exist within the capitalist world without making it worse. And so what I've done is I had 2 different types of pins made. We have the Let's Talk About Miss Baby logo, and then also the Euripides, the simple Euripides logo that I had from last year. Those are in pins. We have stickers of Euripides, the logo. We have this beautiful Chthonic Cuties, which I teased it once, but I didn't want to like put it out there too much because I don't have it available just yet, but it's beautiful. And we have tote bags again of Euripides and the logo, and we're looking at doing some more things, including with some of the listeners that were on the group tour who happen to be like creators and makers in their ways. So it's going to be really cool. This is all stuff that's going to be shipped directly from me or Michaela. We're still logistically working out. It might be like it's coming from both of us. For right now, I have everything. We're at 2 like kind of pretty opposite ends of the country, to make that clear now. And so, yeah, this stuff is going to be sold directly through our website where it's not print on demand anymore. So it's considerably better for the environment. I have used, other than the pins, which I had to get, I forget where they're from, but it was pre-tariffs, thank God. So we got a lot before I'm screwed again. But the non-pin merch was all done by a local printer that's out. I guess it's not local for me anymore, but they're on Vancouver Island where I used to live. And so it's like a small, nice local company in Canada that's doing all of this stuff. Again, all of this was also planned pre-tariff. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this functions once we have the store up and running. I'm really hoping it's going to be something, not least because like I spent a ton of money and I haven't been able to make any of it back yet. But the reason it's really delayed is because we had to rebuild the website for this. It happened to coincide with a very good friend of mine who is building a web design company from scratch, basically. I mean, she's been doing it for years, but working for other people. And so she and a business partner are building this web design company from scratch and are doing my website for free because we're both just trying to get by. And then I'm going to give her money once it's made money. But that's all to say, it's just taken longer because people have lives and all of this is happening through kind of attempts at like mutual support type of stuff. But it is coming together. We're really close now. I think I just basically need to find the time to meet with my friend to go over the website, but like it's almost done. And so I will finally have this merch available. And what's really cool about it, I mean, the merch itself is beautiful. It's really stunningly printed and I'm really excited about it. But what I'm most excited about is that I get to handle it. So it'll be coming directly from me. We can be looking at also signed books in there or book plates, which are just like little signed stickers if you want, if you already have my book, stuff like that. Everything's going to come with like a little thank you note. Like I'm really excited. It's just going to be a lot more hands-on and personal and also a little better for the environment in whatever way that we can make that work. So it's exciting. And also it's just been taking a really long time, but like soon, really soon, really soon. Another quick question. This is from Avo. What is the best translation of the Metamorphosis? I'm assuming you mean Ovid's Metamorphoses, but I will just say that like there is at least one other famous ancient text that's technically called the Metamorphosis or Metamorphoses. They might be both plural. Anyway, it's Apuleius's Golden Ass. Like the Golden Ass is its kind of alt title where Cupid and Psyche comes from. So technically they're both called Metamorphoses. But that said, assuming that you mean Ovid's Metamorphoses, my favorite translation right now is Stephanie McCarter's. Stephanie's been on my show twice now to firstly talk about that translation and then another really interesting book that she did about women in the ancient world. And she's just a delight and her translation is really readable and lovely and maintains a lot of like the really nice and poetic structure and also was written intentionally to kind of set the record straight on, you know, all the male translations from earlier that would translate things that made women into not quite people. You know, because that's been going on for 2,000 years, hence the not all men argument being ridiculous, but it's fine. Yeah, I would recommend Stephanie McCarter's translation. It's really beautiful, and Stephanie's flippin' lovely. Okay, this next one comes from Gabriella. Now, Gabriella emailed me, and firstly, thank you, Gabriella, firstly. But to everyone, please, if you have a question, do put it through the form on my website, mythsbaby.com/questions, or via the new voicemail notes that I'll be dropping in here too. They're all on the questions page. I only say that because when I get them via email, it's unlikely that I will remember to then put them in the document that I read from in this moment, which is where all of the form responses come from. But Gabriella's question was really great, and it happened to come in while I was on my email and on my ADHD meds, so it got in here. But for future, if you send it to me anywhere else, it's very possible it could get missed because of my brain. In this case, though, Gabriella asked, do you know whether the most common myths that are taught in schools today were also the most popular / well-known myths in ancient times? Or have we just chosen to talk about, say, Medusa and Heracles' 12 labors? Also, do you know when Greek myths started being part of education? Absolutely love this. Oh, she says she submitted on the website as well, but I didn't see it. So, or maybe it's in both. And anyway, I still maintain my note earlier. And also I want to talk about how ADHD, we don't read all of a thing at once. In any case, this question is really interesting because the answer is like a little of everything. So, like I think a lot of the most common myths that are taught in school today were the most common / popular in the ancient world. Things like specifically the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like absolutely, the Iliad and the Odyssey were just as important, common, absolutely would have been taught in an education system. I imagine, like, I don't know enough about their education systems, but like if they were teaching literature in any way or culture in any way, it would have been that. At the same time, it's like it would have also mostly been something where it's just like everyone knew. And this is a really broad reply based on time period too, right? Because it depends on the time period. But if we're talking, say, like classical Athens and a bit later, and that would be when, schools were, or like rather higher education type schools were a thing that we have like more a record from, like things like Plato and Aristotle having their schools. I think we can say pretty clearly that the Iliad and the Odyssey would be taught in some way or another because they were these cultural touchstones. They were absolutely that important. And that definitely goes for Heracles and his 12 labors as well. Maybe not necessarily the 12 labors specifically, but Heracles broadly. The 12 labors specifically have become more popular for us because they survive in more detail. Because we have something like, I think that it's Pseudo-Apollodorus who has the kind of most on those. It's still not particularly detailed, but like we have it. Heracles generally was their most widespread across the Greek world and most famous hero, no question. Like in terms of the breadth of the Greek world, like if you're talking about Athens, Theseus might have been more popular, but not outside of Athens and stuff like that. So Heracles definitely would have been in that realm, but again, I don't know specifically, whether they focused on his labors or were looking elsewhere. That said, the labors are also very popular. They appear on like reliefs and in statuary and all of these things on temples and friezes and all of that. So very, very popular. Now, something like Medusa, I think is probably not something that was as popular in the ancient world. The Gorgon maybe, but not the origin story necessarily. I really don't think that Medusa's story was particularly common in the ancient world based on what survives and what kind of references we do and don't have. I don't think it was. The Gorgon, yes, and the Gorgoneon in the shield and in the Aegis, like yes, but not Medusa. And so I think we're getting this like really interesting mixture of, in the modern world, we rely on what survives, but also like what has kind of been taken by the zeitgeist and like Medusa is something so different because even today, there are like a bazillion different ways to tell her story based on which sources you're reading or the modern ideas that have kind of left the sources behind. All of these like ideas of her being seductive or half snake or all of those, like there's a lot of stuff that is taught today that I think is like not actually in the Greek mythology as well. Or there's that, there's a very common issue with Ovid's story overshadowing anything from Greek when, for all we know, Ovid, made up a lot of that. And so it's just like a really interesting question, but definitely when we think of like the most popular being the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were still the most popular back then too. And in large part, like that then contributes to why we have them today, right? Because I don't know the answer to the question of like when myth started being part of education, but I can tell you like one of the most interesting things about how ancient works survive for us today is through education. So as an example, and I've talked about this before, but it's my favorite fucking story. So the Greek playwrights, right? So Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. Those are the three whose work survives. And there were lots more. But those are the three whose work survives. And that is in large part because those were the three that became the educational canon for the Byzantines who came much later, right? Like after Rome I don't know, I'm not going to pretend I know the whole timeline, but Byzantine is kind of after Rome. After Rome in Greece in that way. Like, God, there's so many details. But the Byzantines are late, essentially. So, like, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th century, maybe earlier. And then there's a whole question of, like, how long it carried on. It's a whole thing. I won't get into that because I don't know enough. But Byzantine schools taught those plays. They taught those very specific plays. In the case of Sophocles and Aeschylus, those plays that survive for us today survive entirely because they were taught in schools. And that is because in order for them to be taught in schools, they had to be copied in a text form over and over to survive time and degradation and whatever, types of books they were or were not able to read and use back then. So they had to be copied so many times that they survive for us today. Now, in the case of Euripides, about half of his plays that survive for that exact same reason, because they were taught in schools. And then there's this like other half, this collection of Euripides plays that survive by a fluke. Right? Those are the ones, I've talked about them before. They're called the alphabet plays. They are a series of plays alphabetically in order because they survive because a Byzantine collector had like a collection of all of Euripides' plays in like, say, like a 4 or 5 scroll like compendium or whatever. You get like a 5-book series. He had like scrolls containing all of those plays, and one of those scrolls with these certain letters, I always forget what it is, but it's like fairly early in the alphabet. One of those scrolls survives, and so that's why we have plays like the Helen and the Ion. You can tell they're alphabetical, but of course Helen, no H, so Eleni, that's Helen. Ellen, same name. So yeah, that we have those plays, the Helen, the Ion. There's like a Heracles one that was in there, Heracles. And so because of that, with Euripides, we have this really interesting insight into the plays that were not taught in schools and like what they looked like. And we don't, it's an extra added kind of bonus, but otherwise we know all of those plays because they were taught in schools. And so it's a great example of like, yeah, this stuff was absolutely taught in schools. Whether it was like in the ancient world, it's a little less clear, but very shortly after, absolutely. Or even into the Hellenistic period, they probably would have been taught. Really just depends on the time period you're talking about, right? Because ancient Greece spanned like at absolute least 1,000 years of time. And so, there's a lot of differences across the board. But overall, very interesting question. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to play one of the listener voicemail questions.
Hello, Liv. And I have a question. I could have done a bit more research before asking because I'm going to sound a bit vague and ignorant maybe, but I'm a bit tired, so I'll just go for it. I've somewhere read or heard the story of Chiron, I think it's Chiron in English, that's how you say it, the boatman who brings you over the river into the underworld. And I have this story in my head that at some point, and maybe that's not from that story at all, but from some other like adaptation or modern reception, I have no idea. So maybe you can help me parse this. I always use this in situations where, so the story that's in my head for some reason, and I don't know where it came from, is that this boat person was doing this job for a very long time. And at some point, someone got into the boat and he said to them, can you hold the oars or can you like row for a bit? And once they started to do it, they couldn't stop and he left. I don't think this is really the original story. So I'm just curious about where this came from. Maybe you've also come across it, or maybe there does exist this in an apocryphal way or in some sort of modern adaptation. I'm just curious about where this comes from in my mind because I use it a lot when especially in like the volunteering or activist or community organizing circles, there's often someone who gets stuck with a job like onboarding or checking the emails of a group or something, and then they're kind of stressed with it, or they're annoyed that no one else does it, so they always have to do it. And so as soon as someone offers, they're like, yes, here's the password. And then they never do it again, and the other person is stuck with it. So I've used this in many situations. I'm like, yeah, this is like the Chiron. And I just recently used it in a situation, and I just started thinking, where is this from? Is this even from any original mythology? Or does it ring a bell with you? Anyways, that is my question.
Oh, this is a great question. And also listening, I only got to listen. I swear I didn't see this one come in. I've been getting emails, but I didn't notice this one. So I went to listen yesterday to prepare for this, and I was immediately recognizing this voice. So this is Sophia, who was one of the listeners on the group trip that we did just last month. So it was such a joy. And I'd forgotten, but she'd mentioned that she sent in a question, and I'd been sort of waiting to find it on the list, not realizing or not having noticed that it was a voicemail. So it was a fun little like, oh, wow, well, that's not a new voice. And so, Sophia, great question. And now you've got me kind of consumed with this. It definitely sounds like something that, so also, yes, first, you are mostly correct. So there's Charon or Charon. It's in English, it's usually spelled Charon. This was one of the examples I was talking about. So in like a more accurate Greek pronunciation, it would be like Charon, because it's got that chi, which is not chi, like the American fraternities would have you believe. Chi, it's terrible. Anyway, Charon. Then there's also Chiron, right, who is the centaur. It's easy to mix them up because their names are only one letter different in English and also in Greek, actually. In any case, yes, Chiron is the ferryman of the dead. He crosses the river Acheron or Acheron, or later when the Romans take over, it's the river Styx, because they don't like having so many rivers to deal with. In any case, it really, really sounds, this idea of there being a time when he gave up his oars to someone else, like that sounds like it's straight out of an ancient Greek source. It really does. It sounds like one of those like one-off moments, or like even maybe something from Aesop's fables. And it's really interesting. I've not heard of it offhand. I'm doing some digging, and so far, yeah, I paused in that time. I can't find a reference to this, but at the same time, I would not be surprised if it was somewhere. And if my now obsessed brain ever finds it, I will mention it. All right. We have another voicemail question.
Hi, Liv. I am a fairly long time listener of the show and love all the work that you put out. So thank you so much, first and foremost. I have a question regarding the Odyssey and Penelope and Odysseus's the test of the wedding bed and the olive tree. My understanding was that the significance of the olive tree was it was where they first met, and it was such a meaningful place to Odysseus that is where he carved their wedding bed from and then built the palace around. I may be wrong in that part. But then I also understand that Odysseus met Penelope while he was in another location, the name of which escapes me now, but it was where the suitors were gathering, and he was there with them, sort of in competence for the hand of Helen. But he ended up falling in love with Penelope instead, which is on a different island. I think maybe it's Mycenae, but I can't remember exactly the location. So if that's the case, if they met somewhere else, wherever Penelope was living with her cousin, then how can it be that the olive tree is where they first met, and then that's where it got carved? It may just be me not having understood the myths properly, but it's a question that's puzzled me for a while. So just curious to hear your take on it. Thank you again for all you do, and I hope you're having a great day. Bye.
Ooh, thank you. This is also a very fun question, not least because, like, right now, if I if I've got a question about the Odyssey, I'm gonna take it because it's most of what I've been doing to begin with. And so, yeah, this is a good question. I think there's just like a slight misremembering on the story with the tree, because the story with the tree is, as far as I could see, like not in the Odyssey at least, but it could be something that was added later. The tree is not like where they met. The tree is just what he built for the wedding. So like there was a tree in the courtyard of the palace and he built their bedroom around it. And I think the idea is that it was a wedding present. I couldn't find that exactly in the text either, but it's that he built the bed around the tree. So he built the room around the bed, which was around the tree. And so it's just meant to be this like very permanent fixture that is simultaneously a symbol of their relationship. Now the other part you're connecting to is the later story about how they met. So the only source that we have, or rather like the detailed source that we have for the story of how they met and how they got married is coming from Pseudo-Apollodorus. So it's quite late. But that's not to say that, you know, it didn't exist in previous, much earlier times and sources, just that what we have is late. And that is where we get this idea that, yeah, they're basically everyone goes to try to marry Helen, right? Everyone wants to marry her. She's just very pretty. And that story essentially goes that, like, yeah, everyone goes to try to marry her. And then her father Tyndareus is like, well, this could go badly. Like, if all of these men want to marry her, like, and one of them doesn't get to, like, there's probably going to start a fight. Or yeah, at least one fight is going to break out. And that's when Odysseus jumps in and he's like, oh, hello. Well, you know, if it would help you, I would be happy to make sure that there's no fighting. It's just that you have to help me marry Penelope. And so, you know, I couldn't immediately, I didn't have time to do too much digging, but I couldn't find like an idea of him like seeing her and like falling in love or anything. It's just really that, I mean, like so many stories, it's like, no, he just already wanted to marry her. And he's like, well, if you make that happen, like, I'll make this happen for you. And so essentially that, so yeah, Odysseus is like, oh, you just got to get them to swear an oath that they'll defend the guy who wins her to get married. You'll defend their relationship against any wrong that might be done. And spoilers, like, that's why everyone has to then go to war with Troy in defense of Helen, is because they swore this oath that was Odysseus's idea. Do we get to blame him for the Trojan War? I mean, more than Helen, I would say. More than Helen. But yeah, so that's, and then, you know, in return, Tyndareus talks to Penelope's dad, Icarius, and is like, we got to make this happen. And so they get married. Now, again, there might be like more details elsewhere, or there might be later sources that romanticize this and add more flowery details and romance and love, whatever. Like, you know, it's not like everything, you know, in this realm, like I'm not describing it this way to suggest that they weren't meant to be, you know, super in love and all over each other, whatever. It's just more about how these stories get told and what details are and are not important to the ancient sources who survive. And I think that's really interesting. Like, and, you know, at least until sort of the turn of the millennia, and when Greece was ruled by Rome, like that really later period before that, it didn't seem like a ton of romance was popular. You know, there were some romantic storylines in a play here or there. The Odyssey does have like a little bit, like we do know that he loves Penelope and he wants to go back to her and she loves him. Like there are those bits, but not like, you know, details of these romantic moments and stories. And later there are some, but it's just interesting to me that it's really more about like serving a purpose with these types of stories and mythos. Also, I realized I meant to say it at the top. This is a really, I'm trying to figure out exactly how best to record replies to these questions while also playing them. But like, so I got kind of overwhelmed. But thank you for saying really nice things. Honestly, that it makes the entire world to me. Means the entire world to me. It's early. My brain isn't working yet. Okay, thank you for that. We have one more voice note question.
Hi, Liv. This is Maria from New York City. Firstly, I want to say I have gone through your pretty much most of your catalog from where you started, and to see where you are right now is amazing to see, and it really empowers me to really pursue my interests. And I really love you providing a more rich and academic context to your content compared to before. So just wanted to say that. Second, I was listening to your anniversary episode, and you're talking about, is there ever too much myths? But one thing I've noticed with a lot of my favorite history, mythology creators is that they primarily stay in Eurocentric Western mythology, and I think you have a great opportunity to really expand into the wonderful mythologies from around the world. And you can even just start by doing North African mythologies, mythologies from Eurasia, because those are still, technically middle Mediterranean. And I think it would just add more depth and really fill this void that I've been experiencing. I don't know if it's just me, but, as a person from the African heritage, it would just be really nice to see more representation of the beautiful, cultural storytelling. And I believe, and I think those stories should be heard and told to the masses. Anyway, thank you for making such a great podcast for me to listen to while I write AI models that will hopefully not destroy the world. Bye.
Oh my God, thank you. That was one, so nice. And I've said this before on these episodes, but I really want to emphasize how much it means to me to hear people appreciating not just my work, but the evolution of it, because it's something where I know that like the content I put out now is really different from the stuff I did 8 years ago, and I prefer it. I love it. I'm so happy with the evolution of the show and myself and my own everything. But it's, I understand that it's a different show. So hearing that that's appreciated in such specific detail really means the entire world. And to your question about these other mythologies, and oh my God, I agree with you so completely that there is like a gaping hole in the world of mythological content and retellings and people doing this type of myth work. There is an enormous hole when it comes to the mythos of Africa, North Africa, or otherwise, whether or not it's connected to the Med and absolutely East Asia and all of that. Like, I agree with you so completely. And the reason why I haven't expanded into those mythologies is simply that I don't, well, there's a couple elements. The first one is I know that the content wouldn't be of the same quality, and I don't mean because the mythology isn't of the same quality. I imagine it very much is, if not far more, full of this depth. And I imagine it's fucking fascinating. But for me, my knowledge base and my ability to understand and convey the simple aspects of myth, but also the complex sociological, cultural aspects of myth, I know that all of my abilities in that realm are tied to Greece, not even Rome. Like, it's why I don't talk in too much depth about Roman mythology unless I have another expert with me to talk about it because I can't do it justice. I don't know the cultural and sociological, context of Roman mythology. And that is so much more true for the mythology of the wider Mediterranean. It's something where I would be so thrilled, and I want to say I'm actively trying to have more guests on who can dive into that wider med mythos. And it's true, but it's also that with the workload as it currently stands, we don't have a lot of bandwidth to be seeking out podcast guests, both because the actual kind of vetting process is a little tough unless I have mutual friends to call upon, because a lot of academics are incredibly good behind a microphone and others are not, and that doesn't mean they're not the absolute most skilled academic in their field, but I am not an interviewer, and I honestly I am a neurodivergent weirdo who, if I had the choice, would I don't even know. It's so odd being in my position because I absolutely love my conversation episodes, but they have to kind of go in a really specific way because I don't feel competent having conversations with just anyone, because of the way I am and what I'm fairly sure is undiagnosed autism. It makes me so anxious to talk to new people for the show, to the point where I often flounder and feel like I am a lot of the time they go great and we immediately fall into a comfortable rapport and then we're golden. But if that doesn't happen, I think I get out a good conversation because I've had minimal to no complaints about them, but the toll they take on my nervous system when I don't feel like I'm connecting with the guest, or I don't feel like they get my personality, or they think I'm too much or not smart enough or not experienced enough in the field, and whether or not that's actually true of how they feel, it's how I feel, and it can take a lot out of me. And so that's all to say, it's a little scary sometimes to reach out to guests who I don't know, or I can't hear them on audio, or I don't have some kind of connection, just mutuals or whatever. It's really stressful. And because I'm not connected to too much in the ancient med beyond Greece and Rome, it then becomes harder. And then on the absolute simplistic side of it just takes a lot of coordination. And so I've made this call before and it remains so true. If anyone has suggestions for people who are experts in that broader realm and could come on the show, I would be so grateful, particularly people that have been on an audio program or have kind of conveyed that they have a more I really have trouble with professionalism, the expectations of professionalism, and whether or not I am behaving in a way that is quote unquote professional and appropriate. That stuff makes me so uncomfortable. I want to scream. And so I really just need people that I know are going to be chill with me and just be able to have a deeply normal non-academic conversation, but also talk about their academic stuff. I don't know. It's really, I want to expand into those realms, and especially with the collective, that is our big priority, is to find other people who are doing that, because I think these stories absolutely and completely deserve to be told, but I also don't want to be the white woman swooping in and telling those stories for the other people. My preference would be to find people who are experts in that field, ideally from those cultures or connected in some kind of way. And generally, the real goal would be to find people who are doing that type of content in whatever way and in whatever way that the Memory Collective can do this as we expand and figure out what the hell we can and can't do. Like, I would love to support that. I would love to have a show about those wider mythologies from somebody who actually should tell those stories. That's absolutely an enormous priority, and it is absolutely a goal. So I would love suggestions if people know of people doing the work in that realm, be they for conversations or people who are content creating in that realm, you know, with the degree of like just research and knowledge and like a goal for accuracy and general egalitarianism. Like, I would love to hear, because it really is a goal. I agree with you so completely that there is this big gap in the stories that are being told. I just am not comfortable being the like white savior lady swooping in to do the work. Like, that isn't me, and I don't want it to be me. But I would love to hear of the people who are doing that work and should be doing that work, and support them in literally whatever way possible, because I agree with you so completely. These stories deserve to be told. I just think they're not mine to tell. Okay, that is what we have for the voice notes. I really love this. It's so nice to hear from you. It's just different, right? In this, it's much more like connected when I get to hear from you guys like this. So honestly, completely, I would love to hear more voice notes from you. So either, text questions are great too. I can't imagine myself being a voice note person despite my career. So honestly, either are great, but just know that is there, and I would love to play more of your voice notes. So again, like questions, voice note or otherwise, are mythsbaby.com/questions. You can like find links to everything. But we're going to do a few more questions. Hopefully you all won't know this because I'll finish it either way, but I got to try to do this before I have to run out and run a bunch of suburban errands with a zip car. Okay, this is a great question. It's quite long, from Medea, actually. I'm just gonna kind of paraphrase a little bit. So they said, I have been wondering what makes gods and humans mortal or immortal. For example, the Gorgones, because my brain wants to do Greek now, are immortal except Medusa, who was mortal. Why is she mortal? Is it because she dies at the end? But Dionysus does die and come back to life. I forget the details. And also, there is that kinder immortal centaur, the teacher of the heroes, that is shot by Heracles with poisonous arrows, but because he is immortal, he just cannot die and has endless suffering. And okay. So, they did offer this. The answer there, because this is fiction, and it is all said in hindsight after the fact, is an answer I already have. I want more, even if I doubt more exists. Okay, I have a bit more. I do have a bit more, I promise, because it is bigger than that. And this is a great question, and it's something that comes up in like various different ways, but it's hard to see the connections necessarily, and I'm honestly always happy to talk about it because it's really fucking interesting. So, I mean, all of this is like, yes, you're right. It's because it is ultimately made up in whatever way. Like, it is so much bigger than fiction, of course, but it is invented by a culture. But what is more than that is that, so to get a little bit more specific, so when it comes to Medusa and the Gorgons, my argument for the absolute the shortest way I can put this argument, because I know I could talk about this for like at least a half an hour, but the shortest way I can put this argument is that my theory on Medusa and the Gorgons is this: that in the earliest time period that we have of Greece, we have these images of this creature who will later become known as a Gorgon. So right now I've become really obsessed with these images we have of what is often called the Lady of the Animals, Lady of the Wild Animals. She's a Potnia. So these Potnia are these Bronze Age goddess type figures. They're like lady of, like queen of kind of. And there's a better name for it and I can't think of what it is now. Anyway, but she looks like a Gorgon. She looks so much like a Gorgon that I am so certain. I'm sure there are also like very smart people who have written all these papers on this, and somebody's like, well, duh, obviously everyone talks about that, but I've not seen it directly. But like they are a Gorgon essentially. And so my theory is that the images came first of these winged women with these fangs and these big tongues and these weird bodies. They came first. Okay. And then later we also get specifically the head of a Gorgon in the shield of Athena and of Zeus in a shield. And then we have the invention of stories to explain those pre-existing images. Because stories in a written form that we have them today came after these iconographic depictions. Images came first because language is still developing, and while they had language, they didn't write things down that survive for us today. So maybe they were spelling it out back then, but we'll never know. Instead, what we get are all of these disparate images that come together under this story of the Gorgons. And so I think that the story of the three Gorgons, with Medusa being the one who is mortal and is killed and her head is put into that shield, I think that story was developed to explain the head in the shield and to explain these three Gorgons and the Gorgons who remained outside of the shield. And so in order for that to make sense, you simply have to have one of them that's killable, because one of them has to have her head removed and then placed in this shield. And so to me, it's just like what had to happen to explain the pre-existing ideas. And I think that's probably true when it comes to Chiron, the centaur, as well. Now, Chiron is, of course, like you said, he is the like kind centaur. He's the one who trains the heroes. He's the one who is a healer, and he lives on Mount Pelion, and he's got all of these great stories. And then there are this like race, quote unquote, race of centaurs who are super violent and dangerous and like very rapey and like all of this bad stuff. And they don't really fit. And I think what's happening here is a world trying to understand two very disparate pre-existing ideas. So whether they were images in this case or stories of violent centaurs versus stories of a kind centaur, they are, the Greek world is very big and completely ununified. They shared a vague language, but even that language varied very much across the Greek world. They were not in any way a unified country. They were lots of different countries, right? It's kind of like how a large part of Eastern Europe uses like the Cyrillic alphabet, and they have like shared words and things, but they're different languages. So it's, or even like, all the different forms of like accents and dialects and things. We have that in English as well, but it's across the world in languages. And so what's happening, I think, is that like one region has a story of centaurs that are super violent, and then one region has a story of centaurs that are not violent, or this really specific one who's doing all of these things. And eventually these stories have to come together, and someone has to make sense of it. And usually, particularly in something like this, when those stories actually appear all in one place, like when they're kind of connected, like that's a really late text. Usually it's Pseudo-Apollodorus, and it's something that's coming like 700 plus years after the development of these broader mythical ideas. So someone's trying to explain it, and it's like, well, figure it out. Now, Dionysus is a really interesting one because the stories where he dies and comes back to life is almost exclusively the Orphic tradition, which I've done that short series on. The thing about the Orphic tradition is that it's fucking baffling, and it's this like subset of Greek religion that believed like super different things and was like fairly late, but maybe not. And it was small or maybe it was big and depends on the time period and all of this stuff. But they have like really, really separate mythologies for so many things. And that's one of them. That's how like Dionysus becomes Zagreus. And it's like this whole thing. So it's also, we're dealing with like these subsets of mythos that contain a lot of the same characters, and so therefore to us seem like they have to be connected, but in the actual ancient Greek world were like not connected at all. They were like, you know how like the Judaism and Christianity share a lot of their origin mythos, right, and their origin text, but they're very different religions, and it's like that, right? And so, but then when we come to it 3,000 years later and try to understand this, it's like fucking baffling, you know? Like it's like, well, how do we navigate this? Because we are looking at it as this like singular static thing, but it wasn't this singular static thing. It was 1,000 years of storytelling then jammed into one thing. And we're like, well, why doesn't it make any sense? And so that's the case for so much of mythology, but this was a great question for these kinds of like really specific examples about it. So thank you. This person also added an episode request, and I'm going to read it because I've already done it. And so you should just go find the episode. The episode request is when Hera tried to take power from Zeus together with the other gods in the coup. I've done an episode on the coup. We love the coup. If you search the word coup with my podcast, you'll probably find it. I'll try to remember to link it in the episode's description, but definitely have done an episode about it somewhere in the last few years. Because it turns out I have over 700 episodes and they're like really hard to navigate, but I will try to find it. Either way, I've definitely done it because it is such an interesting story, but I would also recommend you listen to my episode from earlier this year with Maciej Proproski, who is like, oh my god, his insights into Thetis are fucking fascinating, and we talked about Thetis in a lot of detail, and it was incredible. Okay, now to a fun one. Allie Capricorn. Allie, Capricorn. I love this for you. Allie says, who would win in a fight? Heracles versus 100 gorillas? That's a good question. I think 100 gorillas, but depends if they are collaborating and if they're like a team or not. Like if they're not a team, probably Heracles. But if they're actually able to strategically be a team, the gorillas. Either way though, gorillas are not something he got to encounter, or the Greeks, unfortunately. All right, Zoe says, if you could recast Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, who would you cast and why? I would love to hear your thoughts on film adaptations on the Iliad, Odyssey. Would you rather there be no film adaptations, or do you think it's good that they receive recognition through these movies? Big and complex question, unfortunately. So, firstly, I will say that I don't have any kind of dream cast in mind, and I think that's because of how my brain works. I don't visualize things in that way. I don't visualize what I'm reading or the story or anything. Like, it just lives as this amorphous concept of words in my head. And so I rarely, if ever, think about what a person really looks like in a book or who would play them. It's not something my brain ever does. And so I honestly, other than the fact that I will stand by this forever, that Sean Bean made a great Odysseus and Troy, and like having a movie of him being Odysseus 20 years ago would have been amazing. So like that, I maintain I would have loved that to happen in a perfect world. But other than that, I really don't conceptualize them as people. Now, I definitely think that there should be film adaptations of the Iliad and Odyssey. Like, I think that they are beautiful stories to adapt. I think the problem becomes the capitalism of it all, because when it comes to Christopher Nolan's, it keeps being clearer and clearer with every release of information or images or whatever, that the driving factor behind this is money. The driving factor behind his adaptation is money. He's been given the most money of any film, and he's cast for money. His cast is about the box office and bringing in people. He's cast popular people. He's cast currently famous American actors. And so, because honestly, in Hollywood, with money comes, or with like anything comes also propaganda. Hollywood creates propaganda. This is something that I've generally understood, but more and more it's become clearer and clearer to me. Like, fun fact, did you know that in order to show the American military in any movie, they have to have approved the full movie? And that's how you know this stuff is propaganda. Now, like, obviously the American military is not going to be in the Odyssey, but the Americanness of Odysseus to me is pure propaganda. It's Western civilization propaganda. It's this idea that the ancient Greeks who quote unquote established our civilization were as white as colonizer Americans, settler Americans. Like, Matt Damon is one of the most quintessentially like white American men around, right? And it's so intentional that they've cast him as this like brilliant, cunning man who was a contributing factor to the founding of Western civilization. Like, it is so on point. And so for me, I absolutely would love to see an adaptation, but I would love to see an adaptation that is somehow outside of this capitalistic American Hollywood propaganda world, right? Because the Odyssey is not propaganda. The ancient Greeks were really good at propaganda. The Odyssey was not it, because Homer predated propaganda in that way, in those forms. Homer's work was very intentionally like the breadth of the Med. Like, it's why the Trojans aren't the bad guys in the Iliad, because it isn't about good guys and bad guys. It's just about like the terrible toll of war and like bitchy men who run to their moms, which is another question on this list, and I'm not sure I'll get to it, but is a good one. And so to me, like, a perfect Odyssey adaptation would just be what is on the page, and you would cast unknown Mediterranean actors. You wouldn't cast Charlize Theron. Like, I don't have any issue with most of these actors broadly, except Matt Damon. Fucking obnoxious. But like, the last time I checked the casting, there was not a single Mediterranean sounding name. Like, the closest they got was a guy from India. And like, great, we love to have non-white people, but cast a singular Greek or Turkish or people from the Levant. Like, literally cast anyone from that actual region. Anyone that looks like a person from the Med. Like, I'm very glad there are people of color, and at the same time, though, like, it being like the two most like famous, or two of the most famous Black women in Hollywood, like, is still continuing on with this. It's just about the money. They're not casting unknowns for any roles that matter. They're not casting Mediterranean people for any roles that matter. And they're also not paying attention to history. And what's so interesting about that is the Odyssey and the Iliad, because of how they were developed over like hundreds of years of oral storytelling before they were written down like quite late into their lifespan as these like stories and cultural touch points. Because of that, the Odyssey and the Iliad are actually like chock full of anachronisms. There are like weapons from 3 separate centuries that are mentioned. There is like, they are not actually hearkening back to a specific time period. And so it should be really easy for a movie to get it right, because you have like 400 years of like sources to go to for costuming, like character development, all of this stuff. And they still managed to make it all nonsense. And like, from what we've seen, it's also displaying a like fundamental lack of knowledge about the Odyssey. Like, I'm sure they have smart people working on that show, but they're like not listening to them. Like, the poster has this like AI looking face, like this statue that is purely white marble. Like, it could have come out of the Met in New York. It doesn't look like it's from any of the 400 years that you can refer to for Greek statuary in that very, very broad time period that would be quote unquote accurate for the Odyssey. It doesn't look like any of that. It looks like really late Hellenistic / a Roman copy / something somebody invented last year. And the tagline is "Defy the Gods," which is literally not it. Like, he defied the gods like a couple of times, and that is what made it so bad. Like, actually, Odysseus spends the entirety of the Odyssey trying to atone for the time he defied the gods. So to make it like the tagline is unhinged and completely conveys this lack of fundamental understanding of what is going on. Like, you're not to defy the gods. That's the point. That's literally why you're so goddamn cursed. Don't defy the gods. Atone to the gods. And so that is all to say that, like, I would love to see a film adaptation. And I would be so happy to accept a cast of, like, completely, you know, I mean, I'm not generally picky about that type of thing. But what I don't want is Western civilization propaganda that promotes America through one of the most ancient poems of all time. And what I don't want is this quintessential Americanness put onto that world that then simultaneously excludes everyone from that Mediterranean world and excludes the actual history that could be delved into and the actual understanding of what is a really fascinating and complex and important poem. So, like, I'm not against it. It's just that capitalism is such that I don't think we'll ever see one that isn't Western civ propaganda. Tragically. Okay, oh my god, I almost forgot this question, which I saw a while ago, and I really, really, really wanted to get it in here. So I'm going to try to wrap up, but I really want to talk about this one. So this is from Ilaria, which is also a word that's getting connected to that loss of the H sound. So great name, Ilaria. Okay, they say, "Hey Liv, we visited a museum of ancient Greek technology recently, and it was really interesting, but one of the history signs / explanation boards had a bit about how there was no slavery system. We asked the museum staff about this, but she was adamant that there was no slavery in ancient Greece as a whole. She made the point some cities had people who were not treated very well, but she said it's not slavery in the modern sense, as they had food and accommodation, not very good, but their life was their own. She also mentioned the Minoans had no slavery either." Okay. I'm really, really glad you asked this. And first and foremost, I will say that I am not saying this person at this museum was wrong. Greece has its own relationship with their history and their stories. And while I wouldn't classify it as completely accurate, I understand broadly where she's coming from. And also, like, I make a real point of, like, I am never stepping on any toes of any Greek person interpreting their history and culture. It's not mine. So I'm not stepping on this Greek person's toes, but I do want to explain where this explanation is coming from. And you used a key word. There was no slavery system. And that's really important, because what I think is happening here is that the ancient system of what I think most historians would classify as enslavement was not a organized system of slavery. And it was nothing like the transatlantic slave trade or the chattel slavery that was happening in that realm, right? And that is the big and really, 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 really important difference, is that when we are comparing it to the role of the British, but obviously way, 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 way more the Americans, of actually traveling to a place, determining that those people were lesser than you, and then kidnapping them as if they were not human beings, and transporting them as if they were not human beings to a completely different world that they then have absolutely no means of freedom or nothing of their own. Like, that system of chattel slavery, that the transatlantic slave trade is so different from the ancient systems of enslavement. And that is a really important distinction, because talking about how slavery functioned in ancient Greece should not ever be compared to the American system in any way. Well, other than what I just did, which is to say that it's so different, but like, because it was so bad what America was doing, like, it is really hard to compare, because it is like, oh my God. Okay. It's really hard. I'm going to talk about how the Greek forms of enslavement worked, and then we can look at why that is so different and why it's so important that we don't compare them. So in ancient Greece, they absolutely had enslaved people, but the way it worked was that, like I said, there was no system of enslavement. There was no organized, like, enslaving of people, and enslavement didn't happen because the people were inhuman in the way that the American slave system did. That was because they did not see Black people in Africa as human beings. And that's what's really, really, really important. The ancient Greek enslavement happened because people lost a war, because their island was genocided and the men were killed, the women enslaved, whatever. I mean, obviously men were enslaved too, different systems, but like, essentially it was because it happened to you. Like, something terrible happened to you or your people, and you ended up enslaved in either the same or a different city, kingdom, country, whatever, right? But it came with, like, it doesn't make it good, but it's a very different mechanism. And it was terrible, but there was a means of achieving freedom. They did have more and better treatment by and large, and I'm sure there are experts on ancient enslavement that would have so much to say about this. So I'm talking really, really, really broadly about the systems themselves, because what's being said here is that it was not like the transatlantic slave trade, and that is deeply, deeply accurate. There were people who were enslaved, but because it was coming from this, like, it's still imperial, still super, super problematic, but there's a really, really big difference between the problematic nature of imperialism, colonizing, conquering a land, and then taking its people as slaves, and then going to a completely different land that you are not at war with, that you have no overall issue with, except to say that these people aren't human and we're going to take them to serve us. Like, that is an enormously different thing, because ancient enslavement didn't come with the racialness. It didn't matter what color your skin was, or where you came from. If your region lost a war, you could have ended up in enslavement. And like, it wasn't like carried down over generations. Like, all of this stuff is just fundamentally different. And so while there absolutely were enslaved people in ancient Greece, but then even if you compare it to Rome, it wasn't as organized, and like, Rome is a little closer even. Like, there's so much complexity. So like, absolutely there was enslavement. It was terrible, but I can see why. And I think that's just like almost like a miscommunication, a misunderstanding of the question or context or whatever. But like, I can see why there is like a pushback, because it wasn't what it was in the transatlantic slave trade. That was one of the worst things that humanity has ever done to its fellow humans. And it is fundamentally different. It's also a really awkward thing to talk about, obviously. And I'm like a white settler from Canada, but like, it is very different. And I think that we need to keep them as like these very separate ideas, like chattel slavery versus ancient enslavement, because we can't ever minimize what the transatlantic slave trade and the Americans did. That can never and should never be minimized. And so I can see that difference. Now, when it comes to the Minoans, I think that's like possibly a different argument. We really have like no evidence, so it's like impossible to say because we don't have like writing from them. But generally, like, this is a really good question, and I think it's important to understand like even this really broad difference between these types of enslavement, because they really are so fundamentally different. And this is not the question I wanted to end it on, but I also think I don't have much more time. Oh, there was another good one. Either way, nerds, thank you so much for listening. I think I will have ended it on that enslavement question because I do have to run. But I love these. If you all have more, honestly, if more come in time for me to do another one, like on Tuesday, I would love to. So if you have questions from this, or if you have voice notes that you want to send because you heard these, please do. And I will do another Q&A, honestly, as soon as I have enough questions from you. So thank you all so fucking much. I love that I've been doing this for 8 years. It's really cool, and I'm just so proud of everything I've done, and I'm so proud of you listeners, and I love you so much. Really, like, it's really fucking nice, so thank you. I really love talking about this stuff, and I think it's so important, and I love the complexities, and it's just, thank you for caring about all of this. Honestly, truly, thank you. Let's Talk About Myths Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Pangowish is the Hermes to my Olympians, my incredible producer. If you add in more questions, Michaela and I really want to do a Q&A together, so get those in. Maybe some more history stuff. Whatever you want to ask Michaela, we are keen. If you are interested in ad-free episodes of the show, along with loads of other cool bonus stuff, check out our Patreon, the Oracle Edition, patreon.com/mythsbaby. This is our way of trying to build the show outside of the confines of the American advertising industry, because I really fear that we're not going to have enough money to keep going based on that. So if you have ever thought about being a patron, I know everything is so hard right now. Times are so fucking tough. So totally understand if you can't, but times are tough. So I got to mention it. Thank you so much. More on the Memory Collective soon. I really want to do so much with it. If you have suggestions on creators, academics, whatever, that might be interested in being involved, feel free to send them in. Everything is so appreciated. And remember, mythsbaby.com/questions if you have more, and mythsbaby.com/newsletter to stay abreast of the situation. I'm really expecting the site and hopefully merch to be up and running super soon. So thank you all. I love you all. I am Liv, and I love this shit.